In my prior videos, part 1 and 2, I talked about how Ryan, who entered the hospital on November 21st, 2021, was forced onto a drug against his consent, a drug with a known side effect of kidney toxicity, and was forced onto a ventilator on November 30th while having a normal oxygen level of 98%. Now join me in part 3 as we go over the lies and manipulation I witnessed inside the hospital. At this time, I was still not allowed in to see my husband. All updates had to be done at the mercy of the hospital staff and by phone. So I reached out to a patient advocate named Michelle. I knew I needed help in fighting for my husband from someone with medical training. I also reached out to attorney Ralph Laringo out of New York, as I had heard he was defending patients that were being denied their right to choose their care and were being forced on this government-financed protocol. With the help of the patient advocate, we began to ask the hospital team if Ryan could be given budesonide, an inhaled steroid that has been shown to be effective for many patients in Ryan's condition, to which the hospital said they would have to ask their medical team and get back to us on that. I was first notified by the nurse named Kelsey that they denied our right to try budesonide, saying it would be non-beneficial at this time. I asked when would be the right time, when he can breathe on his own? She said, well, it's due to the paralyzing drugs he is on, that it wouldn't be helpful to him. So I called again later with our advocate. She talked to Nurse Hannah. This advocate went with the approach of doing a lot of ego stroking and being empathetic to the nurses who are just trying to do their job, even if they don't agree. The advocate started to tell the nurses about all the great studies coming out about budesonide helping patients, and helping patients to come off a ventilator. Then Hannah admitted she really has no idea why they won't approve it. Michelle, the advocate, says, we both know why, and I know your hands are tied, and the doctor's hands are tied too. Let me help untie them. Nurse Hannah decided to page the Moonlighter team and the critical care team above the doctors who denied it, and said she would get back with us. Michelle, the advocate, talked to the Moonlight critical care team and the one in charge and asked simply, would this drug harm Ryan to try? They said no. So she asked then, if it may help him, why are we not using it? Shouldn't we give Ryan every opportunity to survive this? If there is even a slight chance it can help him like so many others. Then the doctor agreed. It seemed we untied her hands.
90% of ER visits, 90% of urgent care visits could be prevented, according to Oxford University, the oldest university in the English-speaking world since 1096. 72 Nobel Prize laureates. They're a reliable source of information. They also did a second randomized control trial, which is the gold standard for medical and scientific fact. That was the principal trial. And so both of them showed overwhelming success at helping people recover quickly, outpatient, early. It's a medicine that's safe, readily available, inexpensive, and it's FDA approved, as opposed to the COVID vaccines, which are not FDA approved and by definition experimental, because we haven't had the time yet to vet their safety and efficacy and stamp them as FDA approved. But we have medicines that have been out for budesonide's been out for 28 years, FDA approved. It's been used on 2-pound preemie babies in the NICU for decades safely. That's about as delicate a human as there is. So as far as safety, we have that, but Oxford showed the efficacy. And so my point is that we have alternatives to an experimental vaccine. We have a safe, readily available, inexpensive alternative. And patients should have their individual right to decide what direction they're going to go.
And you can tell your viewers, I'm telling your viewers right now, they don't have to be afraid of COVID-19 either. There's an answer.
What you just heard is Odessa, Texas doctor Richard Bartlett, who claims he's found the silver bullet for coronavirus. He's suggesting a common asthma medicine and says it's so simple, you won't even have to leave your couch.
Preschoolers that have asthma, I'm talking about budesonide. a inhaled steroid that's used with a nebulizer machine. So it's used daily by millions of children in the United States to protect them from asthma. So I use that nebulizer treatment, a respiratory anti-inflammatory medicine for a respiratory inflammatory problem called COVID. And I also give an antibiotic to protect from secondary bacterial pneumonia called clarithromycin. And I also put a person on zinc, which interferes with virus multiplication, but the silver bullet is the inhaled steroid.
Dr. Bartlett said budesonide blocks inflammatory chemicals and is a, quote, perfect treatment. And he even gave OAN breaking news on their steroids' possible effectiveness in another Texas hospital.
And I haven't shared this anywhere else because I was driving here for this interview, and I just got word from a hospital administrator that a colleague of his told him that their hospital ICU was emptied when they started this budesonide protocol in the ICU.
By 6:00 p.m., Ryan began getting budesonide breathing treatments every few hours, and by late night, his settings were improving. His ventilator needs went from a 90% use to 80%. His PEEP pressure decreased from an 18 to a 12. The hospital staff words, "This is a good day. He is having a really good day and doing very well." Nurse Tim told me his ventilator oxygen setting was now reduced to a 75%. His pulse oxygen level was stable at 92%. And by the next day, Ryan's ventilator oxygen setting was reduced to 70%, and Ryan's vitals were still stable. However, Ryan's kidneys were continually getting worse now, and we were at a 7% kidney function. On my first episode, I told you how Ryan was given the drug Remdesivir against our consent.
I was banned or discouraged from using off-label drugs which we use every day, methylprednisolone, vitamin C. My hospital would not allow me to use vitamin C. We're talking about basic, safe drugs, and it's an outrage. What they wanted me to use was Remdesivir. Where Remdesivir, we know, and this is not controversial, we know according to the WHO, Remdesivir increases your risk of kidney failure 20-fold. Remdesivir will increase your risk of developing renal failure 20-fold. It increases your risk of dying by about 4%. It has no place in medicine, yet the federal government will give hospitals a 20% bonus on the entire hospital bill if you prescribe this toxic medication. So you can see how the hospitals and the healthcare systems are now subservient to industry rather than doing what's best for their patients.
We were told if we can get Ryan off the ventilator, his kidneys would start to improve. Ryan's ventilator oxygen setting is now reduced to 65%. Oxygen-wise, Ryan is continuing to make improvements, even though he should have never been on a ventilator. However, it was at the end of this day that the hospital would secretly remove budesonide breathing treatments from his care, even with it showing signs of creating improvements. I was finally allowed to come and see my husband. Ryan was brought in on November 21st, and it was not until December 8th that I was finally allowed on a COVID floor to see my husband. Before he was on a ventilator, it was considered too dangerous for me to be on a COVID floor. Now that Ryan can't talk and I can't remove him, I guess now it's safe. I learned Ryan's oxygen settings on the ventilator had to be increased back to 80%, as his oxygen was now dropping. Plus, Ryan has a lot of fluid weight that they are trying to reduce. While sitting with a nurse in his room, while looking at the forced protocol we were forced onto and forced to remain on, we had this conversation. What is he on with this forced protocol that will help him get better?
Well, nothing, but it's all we are allowed to give him.
So you are telling me we are just going to let a healthy young man just die? Is that what you are telling me?
It's not right, I know, but if I fight for him, I'll lose my job.
Then, as the respiratory doctor came in, it was then that I found that they had stopped the budesonide treatments, saying it's an off-label medication, and they do not allow any off-label medications to be given. I asked her how many patients up here on this floor that are now on kidney dialysis machines, and I see there are a lot of them as I pass through the halls. How many of these patients were given Remdesivir prior? The respiratory doctor replies, "Oh, I don't know." Yet as she went to leave his room, she stops at his door, looks over her shoulder and says, "All of them," and then continues to leave. Ryan's oxygen setting on the ventilator is now back up to 90%. He is now back on paralyzing drugs and sedation to keep him from trying to breathe past the vent and work against it. And by the next day, Ryan would be put at 100% ventilation use. The only difference, the budesonide inhaled steroid treatment was stopped. Nurse Tim told me that there are a lot of politics behind every decision in hospitals and medicine, and it shouldn't be that way. He told me that he would totally support me in trying ivermectin. Said Ryan is young, only 41 years old, and has his whole life ahead of him, so why not try it if it's helped so many other people? I asked the hospital about approved lotions I could apply to Ryan, seeing his skin looking dry, and I thought maybe just human touch and knowing I am there would help him. So they told me what was approved, and I decided to do that. So I came in later and brought the special lotion and began to apply to the bottoms of Ryan's feet, chest, and stomach. The next day, Ryan's oxygen level went back up to 100%, and his ventilation settings was reduced to 80%. Then, next day, the ventilator was reduced to 75%, then 65%. This is great since prior his oxygen saturation was at 80% and the vent setting was at 100%. I decided to keep applying the lotion every day as often as I can. It was on this day that I got to talk to a pulmonologist doctor there and got to question why he was removed off the budesonide inhaled steroid that was agreed upon. It was then that we had this conversation.
We can't give him that drug because it's not FDA approved.
What? Yes, it is. It's been around for a while now.
Well, it's not FDA approved to treat COVID.
So the hospital only allows FDA COVID treatments, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
So is the COVID vaccine FDA approved when you began giving it out?
Yes, you're right. It's not approved. I agree.
You also don't mean Remdesivir, right? It was originally made for Ebola. But we know from my husband's kidney failure you don't have issues giving that either, right? That's also an exception to the rule.
Well, it's not just the FDA. We go by the CDC too.
Like the NIH, you go by their findings, right?
Yes, like the NIH.
So you are aware on the NIH they list ivermectin as a possible COVID treatment and even give dosage instructions, right?
Yes, but it's not FDA approved to fight COVID. Just approved as a possible treatment.
So like Remdesivir, that's also an exception to the rule. How about the WHO? You follow their guidelines? Does the hospital find them reputable?
Yes, we follow the guidelines of the WHO.
I see, except for the fact that the WHO warns not to give Remdesivir to treat COVID. Why? Because there are no studies showing it's effective against COVID, and they warn about the risk of kidney toxicity and shutting down vital organs like the heart, liver, and kidneys. It was actually removed from the Ebola trials due to the high death rate.
Yes, we've seen the WHO warning.
Yet you gave my husband this, knowing this then, when ivermectin has little to no dangerous effects. What on earth could make a hospital do that to people? Oh, maybe it's the fact that insurance companies pay a 20% bonus on top of the entire medical bill to use that drug over others?
The hospital doesn't use any off-label medications.
My face must have said enough because she asked a nervous-sounding, "What?" in response to my facial expression. I said, "How about you say that again, and this time I'll control my face like I believe you. You know, I pray to God asking him to seek his revenge on all of you who play a part in this. May he hold every last one of you accountable. The blood of many is on your hands." When I ask staff here, how many patients survive this protocol, none of you will look me in the eye and answer. All I get is, "It's different for everyone." Well, that's not an answer. That tells me the outcome is not good or in our favor. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. That's this hospital. These are people's lives. They are not an experiment. They are not a protocol. They are human beings, and this is a human genocide, and you're all guilty of it. May God have mercy on all your souls. She looked very nervous and said to me,
You're very informed. I agree with everything you're saying. There are a lot of politics involved in how we are allowed to treat patients, though it doesn't make it right.
That was our conversation back then. Yet, let's take a look at where we are today.
We've been talking about the drugs being used in the populations for whom they're approved, but there's a lot of discussion of these drugs being used off-label. And I guess my question is, how does the FDA perceive what risks might arise from that when you've approved the drug for certain patients, but they're perhaps being used a lot more widely, and even compounded versions of these drugs sometimes, which is, even a whole new frontier?
Well, let's separate those two things. I mean, off-label use is very common, and we can't interfere with the practice of medicine, and we won't do that. Mm-hmm. We need to make our communications clear about where the evidence exists for where the benefits outweigh the risks. Up until recently, I was a very busy practicing doctor, and I wouldn't want the FDA telling me what my judgment should be when I see someone who doesn't quite fit the criteria. But there's a good chance it's going to work, and we've had that discussion with the patient.
They did not purport to require anyone to do anything or to prohibit anyone from doing.
What about when it said, no, stop it? Why is that a command? That seems to me, that's the if you were in English class, they would say that was a command, stop it. That is different than we're providing helpful information.
Your Honor, the language that the FDA used in these tweets were merely quips, and I don't think that these quips change the substance of FDA statements. As plaintiffs can...
Is that a command? Stop it?
The tweets about the horse ivermectin were intended to advise consumers that they should not use ivermectin intended for animals and that this could be unsafe.
I'm sorry, can you answer the question, please? Is that a command? Stop it.
Dr. Califf, in May of 2022, you made an appearance on CNN and claimed that the leading cause of death in the United States is, as you quoted, misinformation. Do you recall being on that interview? Do you recall making that statement? Okay. You're right, because the claim that you went on to say that in COVID, that you need to get vaccinated, saying, quote, somehow the reliable, truthful messages are not getting across and it's being washed out by a lot of misinformation, which is leading people to make bad choices. Now, I'd like to draw your attention to a tweet that I know that you're familiar with. On the post for it, it says, "You're not a horse. You're not a cow. Seriously, y'all, stop it." Another sarcastic tweet from the FDA read, "Hold your horses, y'all. Ivermectin may be trending, but it isn't authorized or approved to treat COVID-19. The FDA put out these messages in 2021 and made similar posts on the other platforms to discourage people from using ivermectin to prevent or treat COVID. In January 2022, the FDA was sued by a number of doctors who claimed that you were practicing medicine as an organization. As part of that settlement, you were forced to delete these. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So, in fact, the U.S. Court of Appeals said the FDA is not a physician, and even tweet-sized doses of personalized medical advice are beyond your statutory authority. Is that correct?
That's what the court said.
Pretending to take that ivermectin is dangerous or claiming that it's horse medicine, would you not agree that that's the exact definition of misinformation?
I would not agree with that. There are very well done randomized trials showing no benefit of ivermectin.
And you knew that in 2021?
I was not at the FDA.
No, you didn't know that in 2021, and yet...
I was not at the FDA in 2020.
Dr. Califf, I'll ask the questions. Even to this day, you have to correct misinformation about ivermectin because you created a narrative that the product, which, let me ask this, ivermectin has had, it won the Nobel Prize, did it not?
Won the Nobel Prize for the treatment of worms.
In humans. In humans, right?
Worms in humans.
And next to penicillin and aspirin, it's considered one of the wonder drugs for use and its effectiveness in humans.
For treating a variety of infections that would commonly be known as worms, not for COVID. And it is a medicine for animals also. Both are valid uses.
Yeah, at the end of the day, you created, in my opinion, and I think that it's obvious because you're still to this day having to correct people who think that a form of treatment that has been used, how many times would you say historically, has ivermectin been successfully used in medical treatments?
Successfully used for worms, but no effective treatment for...
It's been administered
ivermectin
in humans billions of times over the last, 30 years? Correct?
Again, for the treatment of worms.
Dr. Califf, let me ask this. What do you think that that tweets like this garner credibility to an organization like the FDA? Do you think that snarky tweets that I would think that my teenage daughters might write, do you think that garners credibility with the FDA and the American people?
I can't really comment on that. And again, I wasn't at the FDA when that tweet was put out.
Well, I'm glad that the courts told you to remove these tweets, because it is snarky. I think it's demeaning to the American people, and certainly demeaning to people, I believe, in my district.
I was now on a mission on my own to find doctors willing to fight for Ryan's life and listen to our request. We do not want to be on this protocol. Why are they forcing this? And who can help my husband try something else? Who will listen to us? May God help me defend my husband. I place my hand on my husband's head daily, asking for our protection and for God to please lead me to someone who will listen and help fight for my husband. Follow my page starting with part 1 as I begin to take you on my journey from the last 3 years, and by the end, you can decide, was this hospital guilty of negligence or solicitation to commit murder?
I will fight for you by the power